Hey guys, it's Chris. From trains that never got made in full to airplanes that could have changed the world, here are 10 amazing abandoned vehicles and technology. Number 10. The Bennie Railplane. One of the things that have made trains so viable over the years in terms of use and design is that they're easy to make, easy to refine, and can get the job done. But innovation is almost always being thought of for them, such as when a man named George Bennie decided to make a new kind of railway and train called the Bennie Railplane. The concept was very simple. There would be tracks and the train would go along them, but the tracks themselves would be above the ground, and the trains would be powered by a propeller. Why was this considered? That would be because Bennie felt the aerial train would be faster than the ground one, and so thus they could have two kinds of trains. The one above the tracks would help with delivering passengers, while the one on the ground would move essential materials. A true win-win scenario in his mind. Unlike many concepts, Bennie did indeed get to build and test out his train, and it did prove effective. However, the idea didn't catch on financially, but there was interest around the world from certain people, and thus Bennie couldn't continue with his idea. He was later forced to sell his railplane for scrap, and the idea was never fully picked up again. Number 9. The Liege subway tunnel. In Belgium, near the city of Liege, there was an attempt to make an underground metro tunnel that would connect the city to other areas in the nation. However, after some time, the project was abandoned, which left the city with a bit of a problem. Construction had been going on for some time, and the tunnel itself was mostly built. And yet, with the project now abandoned, that meant there was no need or use for it to be there. But they couldn't just go and abandon it in full, right? Correct. Instead, this subway tunnel became a storage unit for all sorts of vehicles, including trolley cars, train sections, buses, and more. As time went on, the number of cars and vehicles in the tunnel increased until eventually it became an official museum for those who wanted to see the history of transportation in the area. Now, tourists, live streamers, and more go into the tunnels to see all the vehicles and take pictures with them. But what they learned as they started to go into the tunnels more was that the subway was pretty much finished. It was just never opened for one reason or another. So on one hand, a potentially useful subway was not built, but on the other hand, a wonder of the area was born from its abandonment. And many people who have been there would likely say they're more happy with what they have now versus what they could have gotten. Number 8. The original Maglev train. If you were to outline the path of evolution for trains, you'd see that with each major evolution they become more and more advanced in regard to their energy consumption and usage, as well as how fast they go. During the time of the USSR, Project Wagon TA-05 was meant to be the next evolution in train technology, because it was the first use of magnetism to propel the train forward, thus giving them incredible speeds. If you're familiar with this kind of train, you know they're called Maglev Trains, and they are in use in various parts of the world. However, this one was from 30 years before they became very mainstream. The compartment that contained the passengers looked like its own spaceship, and apparently had the ability to go almost 400 kilometers per hour. The track was built and a test was done, but not long after this, a massive earthquake hit Armenia, and it destroyed the track and the equipment that the train used. Millions of dollars in repairs would have been needed to be done to fix it, and that never happened. One has to wonder what might have happened if the test had continued, because train travel and travel in general might have been greatly advanced and a lot sooner than it's going now. Number 7. The Gold Train. In World War II, the German Reich that was going on was deemed all-powerful in many respects. But by 1944 and 1945, everything had begun to crumble, and the Reich decided they needed to prepare for the future. To that end, a legend dictates that they filled a train full of gold and other priceless art, and then hid it in secret tunnels beneath Lower Silesia, between Breslau and Waldenburg in May of 1945. The area itself was part of Germany at the time, which is why they buried it there, but now it's part of Poland. The legend states that the intention was to stow it away until the war was over, so they could come back and get it and then reclaim it for their reign and start all over again. However, the Germans were soundly defeated, and they didn't get the chance to get the train back. The legend has become a major Holy Grail search for many, and for over 70 years, people have gone to this area of Poland to try and find it. In 2015 to 2018, a new search went underway based on a deathbed confession of a construction worker stating he knew where it was. He gave them radar results, showed a hidden cavern in the underground areas. While nothing was found there but ice, further tests showed that other areas were underground too and seemed to indicate a rail line. But as of today, the gold has not been found, nor has the train been proven to be real, yet the legend still exists. Number 6. KOHL'S Cycle Sales. Several decades ago, a store known as KOHL'S Cycle Sales existed, and they had a very simple business model via their owner named Cole. Mainly, if you had a motorcycle you wanted to sell him, or you needed to dump off some inventory because your store or business couldn't handle it, he would make you a deal. This may seem foolish nowadays, but in the 1960s and 1970s, in which he was doing his best business, it was a lot cheaper to get a motorcycle. And he had so many bikes that he eventually went and got himself a massive warehouse to store all the bikes in. As pictures now show, not only did he have a large collection, but he had a valuable one. Some of these motorcycles were ones that had been one of a kind in their make and model. Eventually, though, Cole had to sell the business, and he sold it to a man who didn't take proper care of the bikes, nor the building they were in. Eventually, he ended up in a tax battle with the city because of the disrepair of the structure. In the 2010s, the building was mysteriously burned down, believed to have been by teens for some reason. Due to this, the remains of the motorcycles were destroyed, abandoned, and then lost. Number 5. The AEROTRAIN. When you look at the AEROTRAIN, you'd likely think it was a fake or a redneck experiment to put a jet engine onto a train or something of that like, right? Except that this is indeed a real train from history, and it was one that almost changed everything. It was a train developed by Frenchman Jean Bertin from 1965 to 1977. But it wasn't a train powered by gas or even magnetism. Rather, it rode on an air cushion over a simple reinforced concrete track or guideway and could travel at unprecedented speeds without the further technical complexity and expense of the maglev track. After demonstrating it could work, Bertin and his team got the backing they needed to do more tests and make these hover trains across the United States once completed. They even set speed records of over 270 miles an hour. At this point, you might wonder, why aren't we riding these trains? That would be because of the French government. They were never happy with the test results for reasons that can honestly be described as greed. They felt it would be cheaper and more efficient to just improve the wheeled models of the trains they already had. Due to this, the AEROTRAIN was stuck in limbo, and Bertin died without having his grand idea being used. Had it been put into motion, we could have had non-gas using trains in the 1970s and not still be using them to this day, which meant that the effects of pollution would be much lesser in certain respects. Number 4. The Russian Forest Tank Squad. What might seem obvious about tanks is that they're hard to forget. After all, there's several tons of steel and other metals woven into a shape that's kind of hard to forget and definitely hard to lose. That is, unless you're Russia. This happened back in 2010, when the people of the city of Yekaterinburg were wandering around the nearby forest and were stunned to find not 1, not 10, but 200 tanks just sitting there in the forest. What's more, the tanks were able to be climbed into and weren't guarded by any personnel. Thankfully, the keys to the tanks and the ammunition that could be fired weren't in the squadron of tanks. However, that didn't stop the people from being shocked in regard to how much armaments they were just outside their city. We were shocked. A local man named Pavel told Russian media, "It is like you can sit behind the wheel, start up the engine and drive off and nobody would notice." Again, the keys weren't in the tanks, but it could have happened, and it raised many questions as to how this was possible. That hasn't been made clear, not then and not now. The Russians claim that the tanks weren't just left there and were under patrol, but the snow on the tanks at the time tell a different story. What's more, once an international investigation was opened by Russian prosecutors, the military rushed to get the 200 tanks out of the area. Despite the reasoning or the fallout, there were many who were kinda happy to see the tanks, as they'd never been able to get that close to them before. Number 3. The Handley Page Victor. The Cold War led to the creation of many things. And on the side of the British, who weren't overtly tied to the Cold War, they made sure that they had the planes necessary to deter nuclear strikes should the need arise. Thus came the rise of the Handley Page Victor, a jet-powered strategic bomber. It was the third and final kind of V-bomber that the British ever made, and weirdly enough, though it was made as a nuclear deterrent, it never got to fulfill that role for various reasons. not the least of which was that in 1968, stress cracks from fatigue started to show up in the planes. This was a result of their design process and the materials used in the craft. Since that point, the Handley Page Victor was repurposed for various uses, including as a reconnaissance plane and a mid-air refueling tanker before being decommissioned and abandoned in 1993. Number 2. Chernobyl Graveyard. When you hear the word Chernobyl, your mind no doubt goes to the disaster that happened in the area of Ukraine back in April of 1986. Now, you might not think that tanks were a big part of the region of Ukraine that the nuclear reactors were in, but you have to remember that when the reactors failed, it affected a rather large area, which no doubt affected certain military structures. Not only that, but when cleanup of the area needed to happen, tanks were brought in, not just for protection, but also for shielding against the radiation via their thick metal skin. Eventually, when the cleanup was done, the tanks and other military equipment were left in the Chernobyl zone, likely for safety reasons, to ensure that any radiation attached to the vehicles didn't hurt any other people. Number 1. Jetpack. Without a doubt, one of the things that sci-fi movies and TV shows have shown us is possible in the future and for decades now is the idea of having a jetpack or a rocket pack, and various other personal flight items have been infinitely intriguing and desirable for humanity as a whole. The concept is one that is simple in many ways. Mainly, you're able to put on a pack or an item and then fly through the skies without any issue. This would help with travel, stop traffic jams, and more. Believe it or not, this idea was also one that was desired by the military. So much so that they spent countless of millions of dollars on trying to get one made. And just as unbelievable to an extent, they succeeded. In fact, a person wearing a jetpack made a memorable appearance at the opening ceremonies of the 1984 Olympics. So that begs the question, why aren't we all wearing jetpacks or rocket packs right now? Quite simply, for the most part, and on the larger scale, jetpacks have been abandoned as a concept. Why? Well, numerous reasons that the military and more had to figure out over the years. First and foremost, they're not practical or cheap. Think about it like this. Imagine your car needed a very rare kind of fuel to make it work. One that wasn't within the ground, but needed to be chemically made by factories. Do you think that cars would be a major factor in transportation if that was the case? Most rocket packs use compounds that aren't easily available, and thus the price of fueling them for constant travel would be difficult on a good day. Not to mention, when the government tried to make them, it was to have a new kind of reconnaissance unit, but the rockets and jetpacks they made were incredibly loud. Their propulsion engines would make sounds heard a very, very long way away, thus making stealth missions with the item basically impossible. Continuing on with the issues, there is the notion that was brought up by Mythbusters when they decided to try and make their own personal jetpack. Mainly, there's no backup. Because of the complexity of the item and the skill it would take to fly it, there's no backup system should something fail. Add to that the cost of making them, the fueling aspects, the noise, the training it would take to use them properly, and more, and you can see why jetpacks are best left in fiction, or to Iron Man. Thanks for watching. Which of these do you think should have gotten a chance to live? And do you hope that something like these will become used once again? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to World List, and I'll see you next time.